So hi, Helenik. Thank you again. We're actually just kind of taking a sidestep from a previous discussion we've had on 9 different styles of personality and leadership styles. And we wanted to come back and review a little bit, perhaps more of the traditional version of what people consider common leadership styles. So, you mentioned previously that there were 9 different personality types, and I thought that was very interesting in how that could correlate directly to the 9 different leadership styles as well. So I'll just run through the ones that I'm aware of, one by one for our audience. And so number 1 would be transformational. So that's essentially an effective communication and an intellectual stimulation type culture, whereby the leader is essentially giving hope and encouragement to the team, so that everybody feels intellectually stimulated towards the same goal. And then we have number 2, which is more transactional. So it's more of a group organization and a clear chain of command. So there's also rewarding of good performance, but there is a structure there. So everybody knows their place. Everybody works towards somewhat of a positive acknowledgement and positive encouragement. That's more the transactional one. Then we have number 3, which is a servant type. And that's not what most people would automatically presume it to be. So a servant type is actually more of a power sharing, and it's more of an encouraging and collective decision-making process. So this style is whereby the leader actually lacks authority, and suffers a bit more from putting the team ahead of business objectives, which obviously has its negative points as well as its positive. So that's number 3. And number 4 is autocratic. So that's more of a control over staff, rarely considers other people's suggestions or opinions, and kind of tries to run it as a one-man show, and isn't open-minded to team spirit, let's put it that way. And then we have number 5, which is the laissez-faire attitude, which is obviously French for the hands-off attitude, whereby everyone is left to their own incentives and own business acumen. And that's great, especially if when you know you're hiring people because they're good at what they do, then you can actually let them get on with what they do, and let them come back to you, report, say this is what's happening, and you don't have to worry too much about the business. Then you have number 6, which is a democratic standpoint. And as everyone knows, in government and countries generally, you kind of asking for input before making a final decision. So albeit you as the leader has the final decision, you're taking into consideration other people's suggestions and other people's opinions. Number 7 is more bureaucratic. So don't know how to refer to it, but I suppose you could look at the German system, where everything is really structured and very well organized, and it's got this regulated sort of environment, and perhaps strict adherence to rules, maybe too much so, but at least everybody knows what they're doing, what the company objectives are, and everyone knows their place. Number 8 is more charismatic. So that's more of using your personality. If you've got a charming personality, using your charm to, I guess, gain people's respect, people's trust. Your team's general influence by you is a great one. So they actually want to work with you as well as for you, and that's the charismatic leadership style. And then number 9 is the situational, which, as I mentioned in our previous conversation, is my favorite. And that's essentially where leaders are able to adapt to different environments and adapt and change their style of leadership according to the environment. And for me, not only is that the best in business, but also that's the best in life in general, where if you can adapt to your changing environment, your chances of success are even greater. So those are just literally just running them off 1 through 9. And previously I mentioned about incorporating leadership styles into company culture. But I just wanted to come back to your concept of the different 9 personality types and how those two correlate. So perhaps you could shed some light on that.
Yes, so when we look at these traditional classifications, let's say, and styles of leading, they are, let's say, the agreed upon ways that people can manage other people. So we know that there's a way where you can be more inclusive. So it's the first style you talked about, Samantha, the transformational leadership style, and the democratic leadership style, and maybe the situational, and at times the laissez-faire, or the transactional, not really the transactional specifically. So the situational, the democratic, the laissez-faire, and the transformational are sometimes more inclusive types of leadership, meaning that the employee is involved in decision making at times. There's a certain amount of respect that's given. There's kind of equality a little bit more there than normal, and often it's a system that's a bit more open. So if someone's quite, let's say, a personality type that doesn't like authority, doesn't like being told what to do, doesn't like to follow rules, they're going to have some real problems with autocratic leadership and with bureaucratic leadership. And these can be styles where there's a very rigid or systematic way of doing things, in the bureaucratic for sure. And in the autocratic, there's a chain of command. You know, there's kind of what sometimes they talk about a hierarchical system or structure in the business. And that then means that you have to sort of go along with the way things are done. And there are definitely countries, Germany, Holland is another one, you were giving a great example. And there are many in Cyprus, in many countries, where the government is operating in a very autocratic type style of leadership, where you don't really have much debate about what's going on. You can't say, I don't like this, I don't want to do it, I'm not paying that fine. You really have yourself in a position of being controlled by that government system. And so some company cultures are like that. And you will find in startup world, it's really important to feel out what kind of leadership is this project going to have? What kind of leadership are you going to bring? And that's why we spoke as well then about the 9 styles of leadership, which are unique and customized to you and your type of personality and your type of neurosis. So let's call those the 9 types of individual leadership, because they refer to your individual growth and disposition to lead people, not to a specific style that we have traditionally marked out, like the ones we're talking about today. And when you know a little bit more about how you want to be coming across, you will develop your style of leadership based on that, but then also by defining your values. And then from that point, you would be able to slip into one of these traditional models and say, okay, well, I'm going to be a little bit more democratic because I like people's opinions. I want to trust the group. I want them to feel involved. I want to be inclusive because that's going to give me better motivation, etc., etc. And you would have to figure it out as well differently if you're a woman, because women have very distinctive ways of using a more inclusive model. They collaborate more. They raise others up more. I did some study on this and found it really interesting to see that women have obviously a very relational type of character often, even when they don't appear to be. They can be highly competitive, they can be, you know, very controlling, they can be very rigid, they can be many things. Everybody can be anything. But women do tend to have a way of taking care of the space that is quite different to men. And of course, then they also have styles of making decision and taking control and negotiating that are very distinctive. So we know a lot of work has to go into the value women have for themselves in decision-making positions, because it's not so familiar for women, it's not often done, we're not very used to it, we don't have good practice, etc., etc. So when you find a project that's going to be run by a woman as well, you want to also open your mind to the fact that it might have a different way of working to what you're used to, because often we are more used to male leadership, and a lot of those have been defined, leadership styles at least, by men in those positions, which also skews the data to a point where you're not so sure what you're getting into if you're now with a woman. Is she going to be bossing you around like she learned to do in a more masculine type way? Is she going to be using a kind of competitive approach, which is quite characteristic of male influence in leadership styles? And we're coming out of that a lot now. So a lot of people might not agree with that and want to stick with the traditional type, this guy's my competition and I have to beat him and win him and win him over or win the game. You know, that's a very competitive language in business leadership styles. And then you get ones that are not so concerned about the competition and actually just want to be more individually driven and take care of their own purpose in what they're doing, as opposed to copying and being concerned about others. So that's less competitive, which is also sometimes more type feminine style of leading. So we've mentioned the gender, we've mentioned the individual, and perhaps we can just say here also that the traditional types of leadership have very interesting examples behind them, and there's some very interesting research on some of this content. So I'll tell you what I know about, and I'm sure there's loads more that you can find out online. But there's a lot of talk nowadays about democratic leadership. Obviously, people don't want to be bossed around, and they don't like the very rigid form of autocratic leadership and hierarchical systems so much. So there's a lot of talk about equality, diversity, and bringing that in, inclusivity. And that obviously is facilitated by a democratic leadership style. The problem with it is that you can have a lot of time that's wasted by getting everyone's opinion. Mm-hmm. You can also have a minority voice that's never heard. So I study a style of psychology called process work psychology, which goes very deep into leadership. And the style of leadership that we believe in and we work on is called facilitative leadership. It is democratic in its nature, but it doesn't believe in democracy as a functioning success story. It actually critiques democracy and says that democracy stops people that don't have a voice from actually being heard. Because we tend to go then for the majority. We say, okay, I want everyone's opinion, or everyone's at the business meeting, or let's say you're starting up a business and you want everybody to have a say. But what if two of those people have absolutely no skills in that area? And they actually skew the picture. They take it somewhere that maybe is a bit naive, or they might say something that throws the conversation in a different direction, and then you waste a lot of time explaining stuff, catching them up. So the democratic process has a lot of problems, and that's why this style of process work psychology talks about deep democracy. And that's a very interesting therapeutic intention behind leading groups into and out of conflict. Because everything that we fear about business in terms of human relationship, and everything that we fear about life in terms of human relationship, is conflict based. Yeah. So what happens if I fight with the guy who's doing my funnel? Or what if we don't agree on how much the video that this person did for me for the launch is actually worth? And that person wants $170 and I'm only prepared to give 70 because the quality was terrible. I have conflict. So if I want to get everybody's opinion on that conflict, everybody has a role to play in what we struggle with. So democratic leadership would try to open up the dialogue for everyone to give their opinion on it. Deep democracy is about hearing the voices that we are not used to hearing in the group, because often conflict comes from not being inclusive enough. Mm-hmm. So it's a really interesting style that we're experimenting with as a species. We still have a lot of bureaucratic leadership, as I mentioned before, in governing systems, in educational systems. It's part of the problem. that a lot of people feel like they don't have a personal voice when they're in autocratic and bureaucratic. They can't pioneer something new. They can't initiate. They can't be individuals. And the laissez-faire leadership style, I would think some organizations operate like this. So if you're going to run an organization, or you don't have a clear, distinctive style of leadership, you may start off with that, a laissez-faire way. And then you might develop something that's a bit more democratic. But then maybe at some point you realize, hey, someone's got to be the boss and tell people that they just can't do that anymore because they're wasting our money. So then you go into autocratic. So you can see how they're interchangeable as well, and there are examples of them everywhere in the world. I really like the transformational leadership style, which is giving people a lot of information. I know there are companies that motivate their teams by giving them incentive trainings. And some people really like that. Again, your personality style will decide whether that's good for you. If you're a more action-oriented person and you just want to get the job done, you're not cared about stimulation. You're bothered by that. You feel like, oh God, they're forcing you to do a whole bunch of stuff and they want to stimulate you, and it's like unnecessary. So it's good to know who you are and good to know what you need, good to find out about yourself so that you can put yourself in an environment. If you're exploring a startup, you feel feelings about how it's going and you listen to those to decide about whether you're going to be in it or not, because it's sometimes very, very seductive to just have a great idea on the table and all this hopefulness and all this newness. In neuroscience, we talk about dopamine. It's a dopamine rush. You try a new piece of cake, you try a new startup, it's a dopamine rush. You're getting this new chemical in the brain because it's all brand new, and you get so seduced by that. And then you realize, oh my God, there's all these problems, challenges, limitations. And that's where, it gets really tough. So knowing yourself is your protection. It's really what you need in order to not go down certain pathways, which really are going to have a style of leadership that, for example, doesn't suit you and actually rubs you up the wrong way. So you might even have a leader that at the beginning is all democratic, but down the line, as I said, decides it's going to be autocratic. So, do you sit in front of someone that has that tendency, and are you wise enough to detect it? Are you adaptable enough to actually change along with him or her? One thing I'll say about the last two types, which we haven't talked about yet, which I think is really useful also to know, is that a lot of research was done on really successful companies. And interestingly enough, they found the highest number of successful companies have what they call a charismatic leader. They don't necessarily follow any of these leadership styles. They might be situational leaders, if anything, meaning that they are people who can really read the room and they can raise the roof off that room as a leader with something powerful to say, and as a leader that is charismatic, inspirational, and totally unique. And the problem with these companies is that they can't continue their success when their charismatic leader leaves. And I find it very interesting because the other quality that's attached here, which doesn't get talked about enough, I think, is that the charismatic leaders are often visionaries. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes them lead. So I built a lot of that training into my leadership processes, where I am myself a visionary type. I had a father who was a very charismatic visionary leader and went from zero to everything. So I watched that example and I learned a lot from that. I learned also through my own creative processes that it's so important to engage your imagination. And you need people on your team that know how to do that. So you need the sevens. You need what we're applying and adapting our information a bit now. So check the other videos if you don't know what we're talking about. You need the ones who can see the silver linings. You need the creative types. You need the ones that see ahead, that are projecting into the future what's possible. Because they are the ones that are going to be the eyes for where you're going. But they are not enough. You need the implementers, the ones who are prepared to listen to the instructions, who are going to take the guidance and follow the rules and do what needs to be done as well. So you need leaders and you need followers in your team. But that charisma, if you don't have it, it's good to find someone who's going to do your PR that does. Because if you don't have charisma in the company at all, it's pretty much a dead fish.
Mm.
And the only people that can run dead fish companies are really in the insurance game. So if you're going to run an insurance company, by all means, it's fine. If you're going to teach languages, maybe it's fine. You know, a lot of businesses can get away with it. Maybe you're in shipping or something engineering based. Maybe it's fine. But still, you need that kind of spirit in the business somewhere. And it's great for the leader to have it. If the leader doesn't have it, get a PR person or a sales team that has some of this charisma, because people like that. And what we can see from the research is that it sells the concept to the people, and people want to be around a charismatic leader. If they can't find a charismatic leader, they'll find the next best thing. They'll find the charisma and they will join with that. It's very influential, the charisma. And if you look at anybody on Instagram nowadays, or anyone who's really influencing the masses, you'll see they have a certain kind of confidence that is very close to charisma. There is the Tony Robbins of the world example, which is such a unique example. I mean, I don't think it's worth talking about him comparatively, because he's really such a unique individual. His success is totally uncharted. I just saw his numbers on LinkedIn while we were preparing for this call, and he has one of the biggest followings in the world. That means his charisma has magnetized all these people to him. And let's be honest, it's charisma is what it is.
It is.
It's not skill. Lots of people know exactly what Tony Robbins knows, but his ability to market himself and his charisma has made him the kind of leader that he is. And the last one we said was situational leadership, which you said you liked in our last video. Go and check that out if you're watching, everybody on the call here. But actually the situational leadership is, I think, a really sophisticated skill. To be able to change what you do based on how you read the room is what we said those charismatic leaders often have, and high achievers are often highly perceptive people, which means they're high performers because they are processing a lot of information and they're filtering it really quickly. I read a report on bandwidth, and I've developed also my own lead magnet on capacity, and it includes some of this content and a lot more around how the most important skill we all have to learn nowadays is how to deal with our bandwidth, because we are exposed to so much, we are stimulated so much. Imagine now you join a team and they're all into transformational leadership and they want to expose you to more information, more stimulation. You have to see if you've got the bandwidth for it, first of all. But then you also have to see if that's a good motivational structure for the people working for you, because in some cases it is exceptional to run the company in a transformational way, because you're going to cultivate leaders in the end. You're actually developing people, transforming them, helping them grow and develop, and they will love you for it if they're the right personalities for it. So that's a great thing to be offering if it suits you, and to be looking for if it suits you. But really, very few people can do that easily nowadays because we are so stimulated already. So in a situational leadership style, the leader has the ability to also read what people are needing and to adapt the style of interaction to that group. And I think this is a very good skill for us all to learn. And I understand it in the word of facilitation. So situational leadership is probably the closest one to facilitative leadership, because it requires the ability to actually not be a leader, which is really interesting, giving up power type strategy, some would say, but I think it's a point of maturity and a level of wisdom that comes, and I've been around many of these types of leaders, and often clinical psychologists doing group therapy for very specific, let's say juvenile reintegration or rehabilitation processes, are often based on that ability of the leader to be able to lead in a situational way, yes, but to also become invisible as the leader so that the group can take up their leadership role, so the group can find their power. So doing that is a highly sophisticated skill of really being able to disconnect from giving the group the answers, actually. And then you give a long piece of string to each employee to go and find a really great solution for a problem and to initiate stuff. So you've got to be a kind of person that has a very strong ego, not strong as in it stops you, strong as in it's so able to be flexible and adjustable that it doesn't get all hung up if someone knows the answer before you do, because that's defensive. That's low ego strength. High ego strength is absolutely cool, with people bringing in ideas, people solving problems, and you don't need to take the credit for it. That guy got it, right? That's a really evolved leader. That is a facilitative leader. That leader actually exists to facilitate the wisdom from every single person to grow. And this is one of the most inspiring forms of leadership in the world. And we've had examples of it and reminders of it. I think Madiba from South Africa, Mandela, was a great example of a blend, of a charismatic leader. He was also situational. He would dance in protest gathering. He would inspire people. He would stay quiet. He would do many different things because he was an evolved human being that had learned the power of forgiveness and no longer needed his ego to be propped up. And then, isn't it interesting, by virtue of fate, he ends up the greatest leader for that country. And he becomes honored by the group. And that's what facilitated leadership eventually does, is that the group realizes, wow, this person stepped back so much for us to learn and contribute, that they are the true leader. Now, a lot of businesses nowadays, let's say in startup phase, I think would benefit a little bit from going into that type of democratic leadership, situational leadership model, in order to brainstorm and gather information, see where the roles are best played, who's the best person for the job. And then, yes, you do need to have a defined leadership process in place. But until you get there, and this is for people who are in the team building phase of getting the group together, I think it's quite good to test out different ways. Have someone run the group once, run a facilitated discussion, go and do some research, then do a brainstorm. So you use different techniques so that the group can get used to different ways of working. And then as a group, you need to decide on what is the best way. And somebody has to step into the decision-making role, and or a board, a group of people start to take on decision. So one really nice solution for this is to have a partner, a business partner. Not so easy to find the right person. And I guess it's the real gem and value of our talk before about the 9 styles of individual leadership, where we were looking at how do you individually groom yourself to bring your best A game as a leader, and not be all defensive and all neurotic and all critical of others and jealous or envious, and have all your drama playing out, your neurotic insecurities coming through all the time, so that your ego is always protecting you from them. How do you step up and really be able to see the value each person has, and see how you're going to build a team of people that really can contribute what they've got? And how do you encourage that kind of motivation, and to the point where it's safe to do so that they're not taking over? Because sometimes you'll have a personality in there that does maybe want to take over, and you've got to be careful. And how do you navigate that? So you need some leadership training, really, is the bottom line. And wherever you find yourself, whatever you've done already in the past, it's a good piece of research to ask yourself there, well, what did I like about that leadership style in my business before? Or what did I really enjoy about the way my teachers at university were teaching me, if you didn't do a business yet or you haven't been employed yet? And then check out what is it that you'd like to learn. And then ask yourself that question, what are my values? What do I believe in? Do I believe all people have equal worth? Do I believe some need to be offering more, they need to contribute more, they have more decision power? Which are those people? Because the more aligned you are with your business style and your value system and your personality structure, the more successful you're going to be. It's like an arrow that has the spearhead nice and sharp, it has the back end nice and fluffy, and it's all in one straight line. It's not all warped and, wobbling all over the place, and it's not uncertain of where it's going. It's shooting really straight out, all aligned, top, middle, and tail. Same with us. We have to get aligned in our businesses and do a business that's really suitable for what you believe in and what you can 100% back. And then the way you're going to lead that business and or the way you are prepared to be led also needs some consideration, so that you are developing an ability to lead and manage people. If you are the visionary, you need to be working on that. And to do that, you're working on your personality, you're working on people skills, you're working on your ability to understand other people's nature, what other people need. You're listening. The power of active listening is very important in your communication style. And I'm going to end it off with something we said in the talk about personality, that they did a study at the Carnegie Institute, one of the first companies that actually trained people in the way that we consider coaching nowadays. They were one of the first groups of people that coached businesses, and they did this research on financial stability, and I still find it remarkable every time I tell it. They tested different ways of predicting your future income, and they said really your communication skills, your negotiation skills, and your leadership skills are all really important to predict future income and stability of income. But more important than all of these is personality.
Yeah.
And personality, together with communication, negotiation, and leadership, are the 4 key winning components for you to become successful and reliable and solid in your success. And it is 75% of the outcome of that success. Only 15%, that's this little number 5 factor, is based on your technical skill. So you can see then that leadership, communication, negotiation are all based on who you are as a person, how you relate to people, how defensive you get when someone disagrees with you, is all personality based. You can learn to fake some of that through your communication, and you can learn some negotiation skills. But it's a hell of a lot better if you are aligned in that moment and you don't feel threatened. You're not just saying the words to get the deal cinched at the end of the meeting so that you don't lose the client. You genuinely realize, yeah, okay, well, am I prepared to negotiate here? What values will I be negotiating? What's in my personality? Who am I inside of that negotiation discussion? And how do I feel if this person is steamrolling me and dominating me right now in a kind of autocratic way? Do I have the ego strength to adapt? Like you were saying at the beginning, Samantha, so important, that adaptability to how things are going to be changing with me and others.
No, I agree. And going back to the adaptability factor, I say that because, it's very easy to be, if you are a situational leader, that's great and good for you, because it's a tough role to have, and it's a tough ability and skill to be able to manage. But if you were, a laissez-faire attitude or more of a servant attitude, then to be able to at some point change your style, or even in that case your personality, when a decision has to be made, or you're really not against, but you disagree with what's happening in either the country, the culture, or the startup decision maker. It's very important to be able to switch. And if you can switch, then you're one level up to anyone who gets either taken advantage of or has no respect because of their democratic or bureaucratic structure. So what I'm trying to really get to is, one has to be able to adapt, not just in business, but also in life. And if you're not able to juggle things, I agree with you, as you were saying at the beginning, maybe take some leadership skills development, maybe expand your horizons, maybe get some input, and then, take it from there. And I also feel, just speaking from a female perspective, I think it's, you touched on it before, I think it's very difficult for females in business in general, and perhaps more in startups, because they maybe have more to prove, or they feel like they have more to prove. And so they take on a personality that's not intrinsic to theirs, or a leadership style that's not intrinsic to their personality. And that can be quite dangerous. So yeah.
That's why we also do need a little bit more attention on leadership styles that are better suited to women and the estrogen and the hormones that they have, because really testosterone is a hormone that does certain things to the body, and it goes into fight warrior type mode, and estrogen does something else. So it makes total sense that women and men would have different ways of leading and different qualities to their leadership, but that they can both lead. So absolutely, I agree. Taking a course, going into an inner circle. I have one, by the way, if anybody's interested. I have a female leadership inner circle, which is for women to have more social impact as well, which I think is one of the qualities that women want to have when they are leaders, which I totally value and want to support. And or even just reading books, knowing more about your personality and knowing what your blind spots are, really important, because that's where you're going to get defensive, where other people are doing things with you or to you that you don't like, and or where you go into disagreement with other people's way of doing things, even when it has nothing to do with you. You know, in a company and you don't like the way things are running, that's going to show up when you have your little defensive moment, or you feel insecure, or you don't actually even realize you have this blind spot and you just react. So it's so important to know more about yourself and to be working on all of that. I'm really happy we did this talk, because I think once you know more about these traditional styles of leadership, you'll be a bit more able, everybody listening, to figure out what you're prepared to put up with, what you're not. And then you also need to go and look at your own personality, your own neurotic self, your own defensive behavior, your own ego, the stuff that you fight with in other people and in yourself, and work on that as well, so that you can actually reach what we talked about before, which is this really individual, unique style of leadership, which again has one of 9 types, but you will obviously do it in your own unique, special way. But once you have that, you have the wisdom you need to actually be the leader that can be very conscious about which style of these 9 types you would be following, and or even maybe develop your own new special style of leadership. Who knows?
Yeah. So thank you again for taking the time to run through it with us all. And yeah, I suppose go do some studying, look into yourselves a little bit, and see where there's room for improvement, and take it from there.
Wonderful. And yeah, thank you from me too, to everybody listening, and to you, Samantha, for bringing this nice little ad in to give people some more context around leadership. And I'm really happy that we're going to be doing a little bit more on resilience, which has come up so many times now. How do we become this flexible, adaptable, agile body and mind that can go into environments and not get all threatened and freaked out and jump out of our zones and freak out, but actually be welcoming all these diverse opportunities, so that we can see ourselves better and even grow even more. So we'll be talking about that, stamina and resilience and being fit for business.
Yeah, being fit for business, that's the one.
Sure.
So thank you very much, Helenik, and we'll see you at the next one.
Thank you too. Okay, take care, everyone.